Could you give us an example how MEMIC works? How do you prove that somebody doesn't have a back injury? I'd like to welcome our listeners to the Boulos Beat podcast. I'm your host, Greg Boulos. Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate services firm, with offices in Portland, Maine, as well as Manchester and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This podcast is designed to provide insight into Maine's business movers and shakers. And speaking of business leaders, I'd like to welcome Mike Bourque to the Boulos Beat. Mike became the second president and CEO of the MEMIC Group in 2017. MEMIC is a multi-state workers' compensation carrier with assets over $1.6 billion. Having served under founding president and mentor John Leonard for more than 2 decades, Mike held the position of Senior Vice President for External Affairs, giving him a broad and engaged view of the company and the insurance industry. Mike's efforts helped to strategically position the company as an industry leader in workplace safety and the compassionate care of injured workers, and contributed to the MEMIC Group being recognized by ACORD as the best workers' compensation company in America. He has served on numerous boards and committees, including chair of the 2016 United Way of Greater Portland's campaign committee, which raised more than $8 million. A native of Maine, Mike is a 1989 graduate of the University of Maine with a bachelor's degree in journalism. He also earned the designations APR, which is Accreditation in Public Relations, and WCP, Workers' Compensation Professional. He's married to Kendra Connolly, and the two of them have 4 children, Kate, Will, Madeline, and Maura. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Greg. Nice to be here.
Thanks for joining the Boulos Beat. You grew up in Maine?
I did. I was born in Greenville, and my dad worked as a biologist for the state of Maine. And pretty quickly after I was 1 year old, we moved actually even further north to Aroostook County, the little town of Ashland. And I grew up there until I was 14.
A lot of relatives still up there?
Not really many relatives. We didn't have family there. We just developed lots of friends. The greatest thing about Aroostook County, there are lots of great things really, but its people are its best resource, and still lots of really close friends there.
Yeah, the county, right?
The county, and a lot of who've moved to southern Maine. That's one of the county's greatest export is not potatoes, it's people.
People, yeah, I know. After you graduated from the University of Maine, Orono, right?
Yes.
How'd you happen to come to Portland?
I came to Portland by way of Alaska, which is sort of the obvious way to go, I suppose, right? My degree's in journalism, and I wanted to work for a newspaper of a certain size, and I sent some resumes. I looked up and down the East Coast, and I was literally looking in those days. You had to look at a book and find the addresses of editors, and Alaska, and I had covered the University of Maine's hockey team, and I said, well, they must have hockey in Alaska. Sent a couple of letters there, and pretty soon after that, did a phone interview and was hired by the Anchorage Times in Anchorage, Alaska. Was there about a year and a half, long way from home, and got an opportunity to come back here to work. So I came back to Portland and worked for a newspaper in southern Maine. And
Which one was that?
I worked for the Journal Tribune, which is a small paper, Biddeford paper. Yeah, yep. The day I arrived, they announced a hiring freeze. So I came in when it was a little slushy, I guess. And it was sort of the part of the demise of, I lived sort of the demise of the newspaper. The printed paper was beginning even then in 1990. And so went away to Washington, D.C., and then came back to Portland. I always thought Portland would be home. I wouldn't go back north or further out. I really have loved the city.
And then, is that when you joined MEMIC?
I joined MEMIC in 1995. I didn't actually really know what workers' compensation was even. I had covered it as a reporter. I'd written about the reform a little bit, and that happened in the early 90s. But coming back, and there was an opportunity in communications with this company, MEMIC, that had been formed in 1993. And I had to read some newspaper articles about it before I went into interview, and interviewed with Tony Payne. And Tony hired me as his communications specialist.
And then you've been there ever since?
I've been at MEMIC ever since, so it's been in my 28th year, astoundingly enough, for somebody who had to look up what workers' compensation was. But it's going to.
I assume you know what it means now.
I do indeed, yes, only too well. In fact, I'm happy to tell people, and they quickly turn around to somebody else to talk to at the party.
I was going to say, you must be the life of the party.
That's right. Us insurance guys.
You got to hang out with the accountants.
Right. You know. And the actuaries. We love actuaries and insurance. So, yeah.
On your personal life, Mike, you were married to Melissa for 20 years, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
Unfortunately, she passed away on Christmas Day in 2014, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Very sad. She's the mother of my twins. We had a wonderful 20 years. She developed colon cancer in around 2012, and at one point we thought we were going to sort of sneak away from it. She looked like things were good, and it came back with a vengeance. And she died in 2014. Fought it gallantly. She's a wonderful woman, very involved in the community as well. You know, worked for the Chamber of Commerce, was the executive director of Junior Achievement. So, you know, well known in the Portland business community, and you know, really, really challenging. She left us in a good place, though. She did wonders in the first 14 years of our children's lives, and really proud of how they've grown up. And large credit to Melissa for that.
It must have been terribly difficult for the kids.
Yeah, it's that age is, you know, right around middle school. Oh. We had amazing community support. That's among the things that I continue to appreciate about Portland, and why, you know, Portland and Greater Portland will be home for us forever, is that, you know, the community stepped up in so many ways and supported our family and supported our kids, from the King Middle School teachers and volunteers and friends related there to people in the business community who knew us. All of those people stepped forward and really, you know, as hard as that circumstance was, you know, made it as good as could be for us.
So how do you manage that situation after the death of your wife with your kids, attending their needs, but also working at MEMIC? I mean,
yeah.
Did something have to give?
You know, I don't think so. I think, you know, having the benefit of living in Portland and being close to an office, so there was, you know, I didn't have a commute that I threw into the middle of that. The kids were at a point where they could walk to most of the things they did. They were very involved in school. My son's first job was with the Portland Sea Dogs, and so he could walk from our house on Noyes Street there. So all of those things happened. And then, you know, so much of the community pitched in. I had a nephew move down who spent the summer with us, the first summer after she died, and he was doing an internship at the Maine International Trade Center, but also was sort of a mentor to the kids. So that was great. And, you know, I mean, people understood the circumstance. It made me certainly appreciate the difficulty of being a single parent, and I can't imagine having it start very early in life and how challenging that would be to balance that with work and childcare and all of the things that you would have to do. But you know, we had built a network that was pretty amazing.
Sometime after the death of Melissa, you married Kendra Conley, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I've met her a few times. She's a great lady.
She is.
And
yep.
I assume you would agree with that.
I would absolutely agree with that. I'm a lucky guy.
So you're happily married at this point?
Very happily. We were married in 2019 at our, we had a little ceremony at our place at Damerscott Lake with mostly friends and family. And she and I started dating by running together. We sort of were compatible there. We actually knew each other from, Kendra was a friend of Melissa's actually way back. Our kids went to kindergarten together. And actually Kendra's oldest, our stepdaughter, my stepdaughter, Madeline, was born the same day as my twins in Portland. So it's like having triplets in some ways.
So now it's a family of four?
Actually, a family of six.
Oh, 6, okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Kendra had 2, I had 2, and so plus the 2 of us. And we actually have a grandchild now, too, so.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Boy or girl?
Boy, Austin.
Oh, that's a great name.
It is.
Mike, going back to MEMIC, what positions did you hold over the years? I mean, 28 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I started in communications, so I was communications specialist, sort of doing PR and marketing. Moved into a managerial role at that point, and then director. I reported to Tony during those various times, and Tony left MEMIC at that point. And I became a director and reported directly to our founding CEO, John Leonard, for the last 17 years of his tenure at MEMIC. And took on more roles on the marketing side and the communication side, and with the relationship with our board of directors in the governance area of the board. and then became a vice president, and from there took on our government relations work, so lobbying and community relations, dealing with the legislature, dealing with members of the executive branch of state government, in addition to the communications marketing role. And one of the things, it's not sort of a typical thing, certainly, to go from those roles. I ended up as the senior vice president for external affairs. It's not really typical to go from that role necessarily to the president and CEO of an insurance company. But one of the things I understood later, actually not even when I was interviewing, I don't think, was that I had a pretty broad view of the organization. I had to learn all of it in order to be able to talk to people about it, in order to communicate, in order to help us sell what we did. And that allowed me to understand what happened in our underwriting, if not the very ground level detail. What happens in the claims department, what happens in our finance and billing and audit departments, in our safety area. So all of those things, I think in the end, ended up preparing me pretty well for this job. And the CEO job is, it's a people job in so many ways. And so everything we do is relying on people and computers certainly, and systems, but it starts with people.
And you became president of MEMIC in 2017, so
that's right.
Almost going on 6 years, really.
It is, yeah. It's been some of the quickest, the fastest 5+ years of my life. It's been amazing, great challenges, but also great opportunities. And I love what the organization does. I'm really proud of MEMIC. I'm proud of that we really are an important sort of foundational element to the state of Maine's business community. And
speaking of that, I mean, Can you, for our viewers and listeners, can you explain what MEMIC is and
Sure.
what it does? I mean, everybody knows the name MEMIC, but I bet you a lot of people really don't understand it.
Yeah, like I did when I started, right? So MEMIC stands for Maine Employers Mutual Insurance Company, and we are a workers' compensation insurer that was actually our causation. We were created by a legislative reform of workers' compensation in Maine in 1992. We're not an entity of the state. We're a mutual company, so we're owned by our policyholders. But our main job at that time was to be the guaranteed market in workers' compensation, to be the market for everybody who needed workers' comp in Maine, every employer. And of course, the law, as it is in most states, it requires, if you have employees, that you have to have workers' compensation insurance. Maine had a very challenging past in that, and MEMIC was sort of put forward to help resolve some of those problems. We had too many claims in the state. The costs were very high. There was a lot of litigation in the system, and the law, along with MEMIC's creation to be sort of the hometown insurance carrier and to really help tease out those difficulties, to help prevent injuries, help resolve that problem in large part. And rates are down by about 50%. From what they were in 1993. And injuries are also down by about 50% in that same period of time.
And I heard at the time that the compensation system in Maine was the worst in the country. Is that true?
Yeah, it was considered the highest and most litigious. I've heard reports at different times of that there were charts that would talk about the cost of workers' compensation, and then there would be a little asterisk at the bottom that said excludes Maine, because it would have thrown off the scale of the rest of the graph. It was It was so much higher. We had lots of problems. I mean, Governor Brennan actually at one point, it was ultimately Governor McKernan who resolved the issue, but Governor Brennan, who was Democratic governor in the late 80s, understood the problem, and to have a Democratic governor speak about the challenges of trial lawyers is interesting. But he said at the time, in Maine, we don't have a workers' compensation system. What we have is a retirement system for lawyers. And
wow.
A lot of the money in the system was ended up going into sort of legal disputes. And frankly, things weren't aligned very well, so that employers really were paying as much attention to safety as they needed to, and employees too. So that was among the things that MEMIC set out to do at the very beginning, was to create a win-win-win all the way around for employers and employees and for the economy of Maine.
And MEMIC's, 30 years old?
We are.
And started with a $500,000 line of credit.
That's right, yeah.
And now $1.6 billion in assets, is that
That's right? Yeah, we're up to $1.6 billion in assets. Yeah, that $500,000 line of credit actually Our founding board of incorporators, a guy named Dave Labby, who's the chief financial officer at Kittery Trading Post, went out into the market. We were starting to hear, the board of incorporators were starting to hear from lots of people who wanted to handle investments. And Dave said, well, we don't have any money, but we're going to need some to get started. We will have money. Insurance companies certainly have to hold a lot of assets to pay claims. But so it was actually Bill Williamson, who was then at Fleet, who stepped forward with this line of credit.
Bank of America.
That's right.
Interesting. Yeah. And now, in addition to $1.6 billion in assets, you've got 500 employees. MEMIC has.
500 employees. That's right.
And most of them based here in the.
Yeah, over 300 based here in Maine, and we now, as you allude to, we do business not only in Maine, but starting about 20 years ago, began to diversify ourselves outside of the state of Maine, staying in workers' compensation, doing that, and being sort of limited as to what we would write. In Maine, we have 2/3 of the commercial market, so a large percentage of the market.
And in Maine, you have to take all comers, it's called, right?
That's right.
And what does that mean?
That means that if somebody needs workers' compensation insurance and otherwise can't get it in the commercial market, if the rest of the commercial insurers say, that's too dangerous, or we're not really sure that you've got systems in place to prevent injury, or if you have a bad injury record, we still have to take them. We can require or ask for certain safety standards, sort of base level safety standards that we can enforce. And of course, the other reason we could cancel somebody is if they don't pay. But for the most part, we take everybody.
So about 67% of the market, right?
Yeah. We insure, and we insure a lot of small businesses in Maine. I mean, 14,000 of our 18,000 policyholders are pretty small. But we also insure some of the largest. So, I always say we insure everybody from LL Bean to Stephen King's housekeeper. So, we have one office in various places. All comers.
And now, MEMIC is the name of the company now, but originally it was Maine Employers Mutual Insurance Company.
That's right.
And was it just too much of a mouthful, and that's why?
Yeah, it was a little hard for our receptionist to get out every time they answered the phone. But and as we begun to diversify, and it became shorthand, people started to use the acronym MEMIC. And so much the way AFLAC is American Family Life Assurance Company, most people don't know that.
That's right.
We sort of created our own name, and really interestingly, it's been a real benefit to us, I think, in the internet era, because when you can have a website that has 5 letters and you own it anywhere in the world, that's a valuable bit of real estate. And so, going to that was helpful. And then as we diversified and moved outside of Maine, if your Maine Employers Mutual in New Hampshire, it doesn't sell as well. Yeah. It doesn't sell as well.
So you said earlier, MEMIC's not a stock company. It's a mutual company. It's owned by the policyholders.
That's right.
And I know typically you can tell me how many years, but every year there are not dividends paid, or maybe it's called dividends.
It is.
That go back to the policyholders.
That's right.
How does all that work?
So we're not you mentioned not a stock company. A stock company would be trying to produce a profit for its stockholders and would be, probably creating dividends that may go back to stockholders. In a mutual company, when you have excess surplus, and that sounds like a sort of a double positive, I suppose. Excess and surplus seem like the same word, but surplus has a very specific meaning within the insurance world. But when you have excess, more than you necessarily need to hold to deal with any potential contingency that could befall the organization, you can turn that money back to policyholders. And not all mutuals do that. Some simply reinvest it in their bottom line and hold on to it and build sort of a war chest. And it helps them build investment income and do all sorts of things. But we've chosen to give it back to our policyholders. We started with, in addition to that line of credit, we started with something called the capital contribution, where people paid a surcharge originally on top of their workers' comp. We've now paid all of that back to them. We had paid that all back by 2002, and then began to develop dividends, which pay policyholders back. And we've now had double digit in terms of percentage against what they would have paid for premium in a year. We've been 10% or more for each of the last 11 years, and we expect that to continue. Can't promise that.
No guarantees, right?
There's no guarantees, but as long as we perform as we expect to and as we plan to each year, we plan to produce that dividend, and we'd love to be able to grow it over time.
And I'm sorry, did you say it reduces the premium effectively by about 10%?
That's right. Yeah, it's based upon we look at it every year to see what that is based on a certain year's premium. So we do a 3-year look back to make sure. So the average workers' comp claim, this is something people would be surprised to know, I think, the average workers' comp claim remains open for 7 years. So we sell a product that we don't really know the full cost of until 7 years later.
Because somebody can wait 7 years to make a claim.
Or their claim can go on, their average claim, so we're continuing to pay on it. So different than health insurance, as I know you know, once we have the claim, we have it for the life of the person or the life of the injury. And so the average, if somebody goes out of work, they have something that they either getting medical care or a wage replacement benefit for 7 years on average. There's some that go 50 years. I mean, we were started in 1993. We still have a handful of claims open from 1993 that we're paying today.
Could you give us an example how MEMIC works? So let's say I'm on the job, I'm covered by MEMIC, and I put my back out lifting some boxes.
Yep.
What happens? I report that to my boss, and then a file is claimed with, a claim is filed with MEMIC.
Yes.
How long does it take for me to get my,
your benefits?
Check, my benefit?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something we're always. It's really important to us that you get that check very quickly. It's also important for us that an employer report the injury fast. Really, we'd like them to do it within 24 hours of their notice of it. And we quickly do an assessment and talk to the medical provider. If there's been medical care, talk to the injured worker, talk to the employer. And that 3-point set of contact is really the most important opening to helping somebody get back to work. That's our goal from the time we get the claim, is how do we get you well and get you back to work. And so, it's a highly regulated industry. There's lots of state forms and things that need to get filed in a certain time. But Maine has a waiting period where you have to be out of work a certain number of days until you can get a check. But you should get a check within 15 days of your injury. So the first 7 are often the waiting period day, so the following week. We have an innovation that we've introduced just in the last few weeks, actually, that we think is going to speed that up. The U.S. Postal Service has had some challenges in timely delivery over the last few years, during the pandemic in particular. And we mail checks all over the place. So we've recently created an ability now that we can send people their payment by Venmo to PayPal accounts, direct to a bank account, of course, which we've offered for a while. But we're really trying to push that because one of the things we know is that a lot of the people who are injured at work need that paycheck. I mean, people are living paycheck to paycheck. In the more dangerous industries where people are more likely to get hurt, that is often the case. And so getting a payment to somebody really does wonders for their sort of mental well-being and their ability to think about, okay, I am going to be taken care of now. I can focus on getting better and getting back to work.
Yeah, so the financial worries
That's
pushed
right.
to the side.
Yeah.
In this business, there's got to be fraud. I mean,
Yep.
I'm thinking of back injuries. I mean, how do you prove that somebody doesn't have a back injury? How does all that work? How do you know somebody's telling you the truth?
Yeah, there are a bunch of ways that we look at it. Some which I won't tell you because we don't want to give away our secrets. But no, that's not true. I'll tell you. But we'll look at first of all, an unwitnessed claim is something that we say, okay, there are several things that are sort of red flags in a claim. Okay, we're going to dig into that more. Nobody else saw this happen. Okay, tell us more about this. Let's understand. What else do you do outside of work? Was there anything else that would have contributed to it? What does the doctor say? The doctors often say, yeah, this is a legitimate, there's a muscle tear here. They may not be able to indicate whether it was at work or not, but they may say, well, with the kind of work that he does, Greg lifts those boxes, this is likely the kind of thing that would happen at work. But beyond that, once somebody's been out for a while, they have to update us on how things are going. And we do have a squad of retired. Most of them are retired police officers who will do investigative work, who can check on somebody and just make sure. And usually they're just confirming the disability, is what we say, confirming that the person truly is not doing activities where they would not be able to do if they were not injured. So, but we do find people. It's a small percentage of people who are out to get away with something, and there are any number of ways that we found that. One of the sort of more famous ways that actually made the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. Our investigators went through the annual moose hunting permittee list that the state of Maine put out and found a few of our injured workers, and most of them stayed home or maybe drove around in the pickup truck. But more than a few were doing more than what their injury would have indicated they could do. And so they snapped a few pictures of those things and took care of them. And it's important to have that deterrent. I mean, there certainly are people who either malinger for what was once an injury that was legitimate, or there are some that are made up out of whole cloth.
In the event you catch these folks, then
There's
game over.
Hopefully, I mean, there is still an administrative process. I mean, we can discontinue, we can show our evidence and discontinue payment, but they still have the right to go to the state workers' compensation board and dispute our findings and challenge what we've seen. So we're not the judge and jury about that. But if something is significant and serious, we refer it to the Attorney General's office, and we've had a few convictions for people who have clearly been violating the law and attempting to cheat the system, which frankly is maddening because it puts all the legitimately injured workers in a bad light. There's so much known about workers' compensation and insurance fraud that lots of people, feel guilty sometimes when they legitimately need it, and I don't want to be a fraud. I don't want to be helped, and that's pretty sad.
Switching around a little bit, in Portland, MEMIC owns its headquarters.
We do.
At 261 Commercial Street. Also owns a set of brick office buildings next door, 245 Commercial Street, which MEMIC occupies for the most part. And you also purchased pretty much a vacant lot at the corner of 4 Center and Spring and Cotton Streets in Portland. It's where Una's, in my day, used to be.
Yep.
And more recent, Brian Boulos is one of the buildings that you acquired. Do you have any plans for that property at this point?
Well, so the 261 Commercial Street, of course, we occupy, and as you mentioned, 245, which is the former offices of Drummond and Woodsum. There, it's called the Winslow Block. is a really the beautiful buildings, and so we're using those now. Although the pandemic has certainly made those offices less occupied than they once were. We have fewer people in them on a regular basis. And we do have some questions about whether we need all of that space. That's sort of something that we're continuing to think about, how we work and how we want to work and how much space we need for that. In terms of the property that, the block that Brian Bourque and the Tracy Causer building are on, so that is the block that is Cross Street, 4th Street, Cotton Street, and Middle Street. For people sort of diagonally across from the Civic Center as you go south, sort of toward the water. We don't have particular plans. It was an opportunity for us. We use the parking currently there, but we also can lease that for other purposes. We think that there's great potential. Once we had owned a couple of the plots, we felt like it made sense to complete the block by buying the Brian Bourque property when it became available, when the owner of the bar decided he couldn't make a go of it anymore and shut down. We said, okay, this seems like it makes sense for us to have that. So we know there's great potential there. We've looked at what the potential is to do, and there's, you could do a pretty significant building. We don't know if that would be office, that could be housing, it could be any number of things.
It's a great location.
Really is.
A good investment too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, you mentioned we have 1.6 billion in assets, and we really didn't. We were in our building, our office building at 261 Commercial Street for many years before we bought it. We didn't actually buy it until 2011. We actually bought the Drummond Woodsum property before we bought our current building, and we bought our 261 from the Batemans, who did a wonderful job as stewards of the building, made it a nice office space, and then we'd been in it and started. When we were first there, we were only on the top 4 floors, and we slowly over time took that all over, and then even needed spillover into the 245 building. But
that used to be the Hannaford Brothers. Your headquarters.
Yes.
Used to be the Hannaford Brothers warehouse.
Yeah, there's a great. I have a great. My friend Steve Bromwich at the Maine Historical Society provided me with, and I'd seen it before, but it's actually John Calvin Stevens drawing and sort of painting of the building in 1920 when it was built. Had one less floor than it does today, but it was originally built as a Hannaford Brothers cold storage warehouse. You could see a place where literally there were horse and buggy, and there was I think a narrow gauge railroad train that may have pulled up to the front to drop things off. There was I remember talking to a courtesy driver. I was coming back from an auto dealership one day, and he was dropping me off, and he remembered as a kid seeing people slide sides of beef off of a train car in the middle of Commercial Street into into the building we were in today. But then at some point, I don't know when Hannaford left it actually, but at some point I think in the 80s is when E.C. Jordan and ABB Environmental went into that building, and I don't know if they or the Batemans
I think they were the first
reskinned
tenants.
it. They were, okay, yeah. Yeah, you know all this history.
Well, some of it. MEMIC's only line of business is workers' compensation. Do you see that expanding into other areas at any time?
Not really. That's funny. We were just talking about that yesterday with somebody around our IT system. We do write employment practices liability, but only associated with workers' comp insurance, and it's sort of an addition to the workers' comp policy. But we feel like being specialists in what we do is really valuable. We think that we don't really know other lines of insurance that well, and then it becomes much more of a financial play as opposed to, I do think that the ethic of the organization, the mission we have to reduce injuries, to help people, to make workers' comp work better is what we talk about. And when we say that, we're talking about it for the injured worker, for the employer, for the worker who's not injured but stays safe as a result of the efforts that we provide. So, that sort of sense of mission is really pretty deeply ingrained in who we are and what we do. I think that would be diluted if we went into other lines. And frankly, there's not a huge call for more insurance companies who write more lines of business.
Imagine.
Yeah, that's right. So we like what we do, and we think we can be better at it than others. And so with our work that as we've expanded outside of Maine, we've really focused and sort of put that stake in the ground to say there are a few other companies that specialize in workers' comp, but we say, we know this business. And the challenge about workers' comp is insurers, they can't get into it just a little. It's a complex business, and there's a lot of tentacles. I mean, the fact that we sell the policy to the employer, but the ultimate beneficiary is really the injured worker, and there's a medical provider in the middle of all of that. It's a complexity and huge regulation. I think it's smart to be a specialist.
You're considered, or the company's considered, a long line.
Yes.
Explain what a long line is.
So that refers a little bit to, as I was talking about, the fact that a claim stays with us forever, and that the average claim is open for 7 years. So you can have claims go on for a lifetime. There was a story back in the late 2000s, or the late, I guess 1999, somewhere like that, where a woman in New York had died recently, who had been the widow of a worker who had died in 1923. And had been continuing to get a payment. So, thinking about that, that's a long tail, as they say.
Yeah, how do you plan for that?
It's almost impossible. That's why we have actuaries to help us understand how likely that might be and what to do.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We talked about the office buildings that MEMIC owns, and you mentioned that not all the employees are back.
That's right.
Is some still working totally remotely, or are they coming in part?
For the most part, they're coming in the part. We consider we sort of have recently said all of our staff is hybrid at some level, because at some point, even if they're far remote to us as an organization, there's sometimes we're going to call people in for a meeting, for a set of meetings during a week. We have employees in 22 different states now, I think, up and down the Eastern Seaboard, most in Maine and the second most in New York State, because that's our second biggest state in terms of what our business that we write. But our main people, depends on their department, depends on their job. There certainly are people in the office every day. If I'm around, I'm in the office every day. For me, it's how I like to work. I prefer that, and
That's what you're used to.
And they give me a nice space to go to, so that's not so bad either. Yeah,
terrible view.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. That is one of the building has beautiful big windows, and that really that daylight is really amazing. And being in Portland's Old Port is a special place. So. I think right now we're still in sort of that hybrid place, and every few months we're sort of checking in to say, how's our productivity? Are we getting done what we need to do? We are largely, and being able to help people, save people a commute a couple of days a week makes a big difference in some of their lives.
Sure, time and gas.
Absolutely.
But one of the challenges with remote working, I always thought, is the culture. How do you build a culture if everybody's working remotely, or if you're an intern coming in, right? Or first year out of college, you get a job, and how does somebody like that pick up on the vibe and
I think
business is done?
I think that's a real challenge, and I actually think much the way you can't necessarily create a brand from just advertising You have to sort of do public relations, and people have to understand sort of what it means, what the value of it is. I don't think you can actually create a culture remotely. I mean, certain companies probably have. Luckily, we had a strong one to start with, but those people who have joined us since, you really do have to work at it, and you have to communicate really often, and you have to create reasons for people to come together. And really, we had a meeting just this week, in fact, with all of our managers from anywhere in the country, and had them all come in for a one-day session. And the ideas that come out of that, the excitement, the camaraderie, is really important, and you have to reinforce those. You have to use the communication tools you have, but we have to do even better than that, and be intentional about it.
So Mike, during the pandemic, what happened to worker productivity? Did you track that? Did it go up, did it go down, and people working remotely?
We didn't see it go down, but it is a difficult thing to track because there was a lot of different things happening in the workforce. So for one thing, in terms of a worker, there were fewer claims because there were fewer people out working naturally. So you had that happen. It gave us time to catch up on other things and get other things done. It took a little bit of time to transition, but we were largely ready. We had invested in remote working tools with WebEx is our platform that we use. And we had, I always say we were smart to have invested in it and said we're going to do it. We were lucky to have gotten it installed in February of 2020. So a few weeks before the pandemic, before we had to test it all, on March 16th, when everybody left the office and there were suddenly, 500 people working remotely. And it worked. We were leading up to that time, we thought we were going to take a day and test, send everybody home and test our systems and see, and turned out the test was live. So we had that ability, and we did a lot of work. We were really, I think, thoughtful about talking to managers early on to say, you got to stay in close contact with people. Right. They're going to have questions, they're going to have concerns, they're going to be lonely, they're worried about the pandemic itself, they're worried about their family, all of those things. So, we felt like we had a pretty good, and honestly, we had people working remotely since the inception of the company. Some of our safety people, we'd prefer that there are safety trainers, which we've invested a lot in at MEMIC. We prefer them to be closer to their clients, so the workplaces that they go out and visit. And we have nurses on staff who help injured workers, and they often worked remotely. So again, they were close to their clients, where they could meet with them and help them. So we'd had a little bit of a head start. We sort of knew what it looked like, but we didn't necessarily believe, I don't think, that we could operate entirely remotely. And turns out we can. I don't think ideally entirely remotely over a long period of time. I think that's the culture stuff. That's there's just so many things that get solved much more easily when you're face to face with people.
Yeah, I agree with you. You mentioned, and this reminded me, something about a safety specialist.
Yeah.
So explain what happens when you take on a new customer or client. Yeah. How do you get them to buy into safety?
Well, there's hopefully they care about it because they care about their employees to begin with, and most employers do, and of course you do, but then to invest time and energy in that is that's another step, right? You have being intentional about that. So we show them their experience. If their experience deteriorates, it's literally going to cost them money, but more than just their workers' comp cost. You have costs related to having to replace people. You'll have downtime. You might have to hire somebody else to replace people for a while, and they don't have the same expertise. You might have to do some training of some other people. So there are a bunch of sort of unanticipated costs, I think, in addition to, like if you have an auto accident, you likely your insurance rates are going to go up. And the same is true of workers' comp at a certain level. So, that certainly motivates people. But we have a team of safety trainers who will send into workplaces and either help in terms of setting up a workplace, if it's an office, sort of helping on the ergonomic side, a manufacturing place, sort of looking often at ergonomics, sort of how the work and the body fit together, how the machines and the body work together, whether the machines are properly guarded, things like that, have them look at. And we really act as consultants, and we're there to help people resolve problems within their safety area, or even things that they haven't seen yet, and just sort of making them aware. So we take on that teacher role with them to help people see it and understand it. And it was really one of the vital things at the start of the company. It really, with the highest injury rate in the country, the best way to reduce the cost was going to be to reduce the number of injuries. I mean, it was a pretty obvious thing. But it was Tom Moser, who was part of the original board of directors, one of the board members, Moser Furniture, yeah, who said, well, we're not exactly an insurance company. We're really a safety company that happens to do insurance. And while we absolutely are an insurance company, we take that seriously. That's how we like to look at what we do. We'd like to make sure we do that first. Let's prevent injuries first.
What's your recollection of the worst claim MEMIC's ever had, or the worst experience?
Yeah, the scariest and worst for me, there are a couple, but the one that comes to mind that people will recognize immediately was the explosion in Farmington at the nonprofit that blew the building to bits. And the firefighters were there. We did not insure the firefighters, but we insured the maintenance worker, a guy named Larry Lord, who was there and was very seriously burned. And most people wouldn't expected him to survive. But he was a strong man, clearly, strong constitution, hardy Mainer. And he was sent to Boston for months and got very serious care. Burn cases are it's very expensive, very specialized kind of care, and he recovered and did amazingly well. Now, not to go back to work, but given what that claim could develop into, it was remarkably. It's in the millions of dollars. We know that, but there are claims that we're starting to see around the country. We have not seen one, and I've got to find some wood to knock on right here because you never know what's around the corner. But that are $10 million and more, and again, there's no limit. A lot of insurance, there's a limit on what you would pay. In workers' comp, that's called statutory limits, which is to say, as long as the injury is affecting the person, you're responsible for it. So when somebody insures, it is.
But MEMIC takes out insurance.
That's right.
Certain claim level.
Yeah, it's reinsurance. Yeah, we go through that every year, and it's a big expense, but it's really important to have to provide sort of protection to our own balance sheet. But it's essentially insurance for insurance companies. So, in our case, in some cases, the claims, if something goes over $5 million, they jump in and they cover a corridor. And if something even were to be bigger, there's another set of reinsurers over the top of that. And there are potential very big claims out there, and so finding a way to protect the company against those is an important thing.
And how many states does MEMIC do business in, did you say?
Well, we're licensed across the country, so we're able to and authorized to write workers' comp in basically every state. There are 4 states that handle it through a state entity. They're considered monopolistic states, but we can go anywhere. But we really are marketing down the East Coast. We feel like that's a place where we can sort of that's plenty to bite off. And in total, we write about $200 million in premium outside of the state of Maine, 205 this year. But there's $20 billion of workers' compensation premium just down the eastern seaboard from basically Maine to Florida. So there's a lot of room to run in those places for us. We're not going to be the insurer for everybody. We're not necessarily going to be the cheapest. But we think our brand of workers' comp, being a specialist, being able to help people get through claims when they do have them, but also providing the safety up front is something that's special in the marketplace, and we think we'll continue to sell. So yeah, those eastern seaboard states are our focus.
And you can be selective too. Unlike Maine, we have to take all comers.
That's right.
Outside of Maine, you don't have to take everybody. You can focus on the more profitable.
Yeah, the ones that people always say are the bridge painting contractors and things like that, where if things happen, it's very, very serious. So in Maine, we do insure those teams when they come into the state to do that work. We don't do that outside of Maine, and we stay out of the riskiest of business. There's a lot of transportation risks that are pretty challenging too. So we stay away from those kinds of things.
What keeps you up at night? Business related.
Yeah. Let's see, this week, what are we talking about this week? Well, we've been talking about the fact that we're implementing new IT systems, and those things are very expensive and complex, and so things like that. But related to that, probably the biggest concern of anybody in a job like mine in the finance industry, in the healthcare industry, is data and a breach of our data or somebody trying to seizing our systems. Cybersecurity is at the forefront, and we talk about it often. We report on it regularly to our board of directors. We invest as much as we think is absolutely, much as we think we can, and then we ask, what else should we do? Because it's pretty important, and you've seen it happen in various places around the country. We're a target. We get thousands of pings every day, somebody trying to find their way into our system. And the biggest threat, as most people know, is usually your own people who might click on something that arrives. So we test our employees regularly.
We've all done it too.
That's right. Yeah. So you have to. So that's the thing that keeps me awake.
What are your core beliefs that guide you running the company? Can you identify those? I can certainly identify our values as a company, and I think those are closely probably aligned with mine because we put them in place. But we talk about being conscientious. That's the first thing. We all work at what we do, and we want to make sure that we're we're nose to the grindstone kind of people. We work at being good at what we do, no matter what it is. We want to be good partners, so partnership is an important value for us. We believe we're experts at workers' comp or in safety or in handling claims, so having everybody take it upon themselves to be very good at what they do and to learn where they need to be an expert. And two of the more recent values that I think are more they're ingrained in the company, but they're aspirational too. And one is being transparent. We think that being transparent with employees in particular and others is, we don't have anything to hide necessarily. We are who we are. We do what we do. We want to make sure that those motivations are understood and that people don't feel like they're misaligned in some way. But the last one, and my favorite one, is be curious. And it's something I've said. It goes back to my journalism days. When I was a journalist, I had literally almost a license to ask questions and to learn things. And for me, that's it's a great thing. And in a business like insurance, where very few people come into it and went to school to be in insurance or planned to be in insurance, you have to learn it, and you have to learn it on the job. And the way you do that is by asking questions, by being curious, by wondering, wait a minute, what does that mean? How does this work? Why do we do it this way? Those are, I love that. And I love, we have a great internship program, and we have 14 or 15 interns usually come in. I have a lunch with them twice during their tenure, just them and me. And I love their questions. They're very curious and they're very interested, and they're good questions, and they're things that we all need to continue to ask ourselves. So those are certainly really high in my list of values. The intern program, I imagine you must hire some of those guys.
We do.
Permanently, or women.
Yeah, we do both. Yeah, we've had, actually I was in a meeting yesterday with a woman who'd been an intern with us 10 years ago, and she's been with us, 10 years in a manager role now, a very important role with us. And, I would say every year we bring people back from that program. And, we're happy if they go into the industry because we think, insurance industry, like many, are aging, and we need more people to get into the industry and be excited about it and be interested in it and understand that there are many kinds of jobs in the insurance, not just being an underwriter, which people wonder what that's people who measure the risk and decide what it should cost. But there are, people in claims who I think they're more social workers than anything else. So that can be a really compelling thing. If you want to work in finance or be an accountant, certainly IT jobs, we have those. We have HR jobs, we have communications jobs, and then our safety trainers, which are really specialized. But again, those are great opportunities.
We're coming towards the end of the interview, but a couple more questions for you, Mike. MEMIC Express, I meant to ask you about that.
Yeah.
What is that?
So that's I mentioned that in Maine we insure most of the small business in the state. When we first begun to diversify ourselves outside of Maine, we weren't writing small business like we did in Maine. We thought, well, a company has to be a certain size where our safety team can really be helpful to them. We really can sort of help put policies in place to reduce injuries, because most small businesses in any given year don't have a claim. They maybe have one every 5 years. So we weren't really focused that much on small business, but we've realized that we do bring value to that marketplace, and so to the agents we work with, the insurance agents we work with outside of Maine. And I should say, we sell through independent insurance agents. That's our way into the market wherever we are. They said there's room for you in the small business, so Tony named it MEMIC Express, and that's what we call our small business product outside of Maine. And we're creating some good scale with it. We grew it by about 50% last year, which is really good news, and we expect that there's a lot of growth potential in that business.
So a small company goes online, fills out a form?
Yeah, they can. They would go to their agent, and their agent would do the online form and basically get it to us. And if it fits in a sort of a box of a defined appetite of the kind of business we want to write, we know what the rates are in that state. They can get a quote pretty quickly and can bind it pretty quickly. And the benefit to the employer is that they're now working with somebody who's a specialist in workers' comp. And a big company knows what the workers' comp law is, and they know what their responsibilities are. They know how to help get somebody back to work. A smaller company doesn't know that, so being with a specialist is probably even more valuable to a small company than it is to a medium or a large company.
Mike, in wrapping up the questions, state of Maine, what could it be doing better to help the business community from your perspective?
Well, I think there's a lot there to think about, but one of the things that I think Maine has to continue to do is to invest in innovation in the state. I think there's potential. We've got some, the University of Maine there's a great amount of research happening there, and I'm a proud graduate and proud member of the Board of Visitors, so I will certainly tout that. But that's happening in other places, certainly the Rue Institute, UNE, USM. There's important work being done there that we have to make sure that we're not forgetting to fund that fundamental research. Maine is behind most of the country in R&D. So that's a challenge. I think the other place is in continuing to attract and be open to business that would be interested in coming here. I think during the pandemic we certainly heard about people moving who were going to work remotely in other places, and that's great. But I'd like people to move their whole businesses here. And I'm on another board. I'm on the board of Focus Maine that looks at 3 particular industries and says, Maine has special opportunities in these. And so in biopharma, being close to the Boston market, having a relatively less expensive sort of place to be and to maybe manufacture, those are opportunities. People can, we're 2 hours away. It's pretty easy to be able to do that. In aquaculture, certainly the ability to have cold water and cold ocean water close by, even if it's recirculating the land-based aquaculture, I think that's got great potential for creating fish protein, which is needed throughout the world, and agriculture. And we are close to so many markets in Maine, millions and millions of people, and with the sort of farm-to-table movement, Maine can be a breadbasket for the Northeast, really, and so those are all opportunities. So I think making sure that we we focus in areas where we can really do a lot, and certainly our forest products industry also has a lot that can come from it, more than just we don't really have to produce paper anymore. There's lots of other uses for wood fiber, and we're finding that, and the University of Maine's finding that. So I think those are the things. And then on the regulatory side, I think making sure that somebody's just paying attention to what is the real impact of a law or a regulation, and being very judicious about that. I mean, usually once a law is on the books, it's on it forever, and it's hard to take it away. So if you're going to put something else forward, be very careful about what you put out.
Good advice, Mike. Thank you for joining the Boulos Beat.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to be with you.
Good to see you.
You too.
Mike, thank you for being our guest today on the Boulos Beat, a Boulos Company podcast. I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with us. You can learn more about MEMIC at the company's website, which is www.memic.com, and on Facebook and Twitter at MEMIC News. And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can also find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and LinkedIn, and at the Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter. And lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. Just be sure to outlive your debt.